The prodigal and the mirror. Leading has the wounded healer. This episode is going to blend a little bit of the parable of the son with Henri Nouwen's The Wounded Healer, offering a raw and redemptive reflection on what it means to lead from brokenness, not despise it, but because of it. Well, welcome to the PK's podcast, where we get honest about leadership, pain, and purpose. And today's episode is home for anybody who's ever wandered away, felt unworthy to lead, or wounded. If you're too broken to be used by God, we're talking about the prodigal son, but through the lens of the wounded healer by Henri Nouwen. So, what if the prodigal didn't just come home to be restored, but to become a restorer? That is the question that we're going to ask today. Be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the algorithms really get to know who we are. And yeah, I need more viewers so we can start going live and stuff like that. So more subscribers, the more opportunities we have. So let's get into it. The mirror of the prodigal. So let's talk about the prodigal son just a little bit. You know, Prodigal son is a picture of every leader who's ever failed, drifted, or doubted. How many of you leaders have ever drifted or failed or doubted? I know I have. There's been a lot of times I have. The prodigal didn't just waste his inheritance, he wasted himself. But when he came to his senses, he came home. I think about, every time I hear about the prodigal son and hear about what he did and taking his inheritance, then having to live with pigs and eat the corn husk and do all that kind of stuff, yeah, I don't know if I could do that. I have, drifted away. I've wandered away from home, and when I joined the military and all of that, but I had three hots and a cot. That was the biggest thing. But many leaders are still in the far country. They're leading, they're performing, they're pretending. They're hoping that no one finds out they're starving inside. I was one of those leaders. There's a lot of different leaders that are out there that are like that they're just starving for something. I heard somebody mention the other day, yeah, I got a phone call from this pastor who said, I have no friends. And it was really made me sad. But then I reflected on that and I said, huh, I've been there. I've said the same thing. Um, but you are what you get out, what you put into it. You put into making friends and building those relationships. And guess what? You're going to have friends. You're going to have those relationships. So reflect on this question real quick for me. But what does it mean to come home when you're the one who's supposed to lead others? Leave me a comment what you think that means. What does it mean to come home when you're the one who's supposed to lead others? You know, and so as we get into this, I want to talk a little bit about the wounded healer. It's Nouwen's idea that the best leaders are not those who hide their wounds, but those who minister from them. That's what this whole channel is about. This is what I really love, because that's who I am, being real and authentic and transparent, on this channel, and making sure that everybody knows who I am, and sometimes it's scary to be that transparent. It's scary to be that real because we look at things like, man, I don't want anybody to see my dirty laundry. But Nouwen writes, he says, the great illusion of leadership is to think that man can be led out of the desert by someone who has never been there. Think about that a minute. I live in the desert. I live in Tucson. I joke around sometimes that I live on the backside of the desert. So leading somebody out of the desert, I might be able to do that because I've been there. I think about when I was in Desert Storm, and this is really crazy because I was leaving a tent one night. And if you've ever been in a desert at night, it's pitch black with no moon, no stars. This was in Saudi Arabia at the time. Not sure where we were, but I was leaving the command tent after a briefing, and somebody goes, "Hey, Sergeant, you know where you're going?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I know where I'm going. My tank's just right over there. I'll be all right." I didn't have any night vision goggles. I wish I would have, but I'm walking. I'm walking. I'm like, okay, where's the latrine? I'm just right down a little ways from it, and that's where my tank's at. And I hear halt, and I was like, "Oh crap," And then two guards come up, hey, Sergeant, you know where you're going? I'm like, yeah, my tank's just right over there. And he's like, no, it's not. I'm like, what? It's not. And he's like, no, you are almost out of the perimeter. And I was like, oh, great. And he's like, you want us to walk you back to your tank? And I was like, yes, please, because I didn't want to wander around in the desert. But you know, out in the desert, it gets dark, and when you have never been in those dark and desolate places, you can't lead somebody from those places. It's difficult. That's why I look at this channel and look at how my life has been over the last few months and even years. I've been reflecting on a lot of different things, especially with my good friend Winston Bowie, about um what happened when I was in Gardena as a young pastor, and he couldn't lead me. He's never been in those places. I've been in those places now, and I'm like, okay, I can help somebody get from point A to point B. So a question for you. So what if the very thing we thought disqualified us from is what God intends to use to reach others? I mean, think about that. We think that, man, I failed. I did this, I did that. But what if it was something that God intended for good and not evil? And so let's think about the prodigal son. The prodigal son didn't come home perfect. He came home honest. And that's where real leadership begins. It comes back being honest. I know many leaders who talk a good talk, but you know, I don't know, sometimes I wonder, and then they're not transparent with who they are or what they're going through. And you wonder sometimes what they're hiding and what's happening. And then eventually you see maybe the ministry implode or the business implode or something happen that, you don't understand what's going on. But the prodigal son didn't come home perfect. He came home honest. He was honest. He wasn't expecting to get riches and get rewards and get all that. He came expecting, probably to get chastised, to be tore down, to be like, oh, I don't know if I can do that or not. And that's where real leadership begins, is coming home honest. And so let me ask you this, leading while limping. You've heard me talk about that on the channel so many times, and leading while limping, while your spiritual, emotional, and relational, your wounds that are open, and you're carrying those, and you're like, man, those things are just happening. I don't understand what's going on. I don't get why this is happening, but sometimes it becomes shameful. It becomes shameful because we're like, man, I'm supposed to be the leader. I'm supposed to be this person who can stand up and who can do these things and be almighty and be this and be that, and it becomes this shame, like, I don't know. And that's why we don't have friends. That's why you hear stories of pastors and leaders that say, man, I have no friends. Well, it's because of that shame. You don't want to share anything. You don't want to be accountable to anybody, and it's living up to those expectations that we place on ourselves most of the time. The expectations that, oh, as a leader, I got to be perfect. As a leader, I've got to lead from the front. As a leader, I can't show weakness. I can't be transparent. I've got to put on a facade. But you know what? The father didn't just welcome the son. He restored his authority before the son could even explain himself. He put the ring on his hand as soon as he walked up, put a robe on it, threw a party. That's what the father did. He didn't just welcome his son. He threw a big shing-ding just for him. You're not leading around your pain, you're leading through it. And that's what's important. When we're in pain, when we're suffering, when things aren't going the way they're supposed to be going, we've got to lead through it. We've got to be that. But then on the other hand, we can't forget about the older brother. He represents the leader who never left physically, but whose heart drifted. The oldest son was like, wait a minute, or oldest brother, I'm like, wait a minute, aren't I supposed to get the inheritance or whatever? But here my dad is welcoming back. Wait. Sometimes the ones who stayed are just as wounded, but they don't know it yet. They don't understand what's going on. They don't get that part of it. The older son, he served, he obeyed, he stayed faithful, but he missed the father's heart. He missed the heart of the father. And that's a huge thing. because he didn't understand what the Father's heart was, because he never experienced it. He did what he was supposed to do. He did this, he did that. And a lot of times as leaders, when we just do the things that we're supposed to do over and over again, we become stagnant. We don't grow. We don't become a great leader. We don't become who God has intended us to be, because we're intended to fail sometimes so that we can grow from it. That's how we grow. I mean, a baby doesn't learn how to walk as soon as they're born. They have to crawl first. They have to roll around on the floor. They have to do all these things to strengthen those muscles and stuff like that. And if you're just stuck in this one leadership role all the time and you don't take steps to challenge yourself and do all those things, you're just going to grow stagnant. So the challenge is, are you leading from a place of love or performance? Are you leading from that place that, oh, look at me, look at me, look at me? Or are you leading from that place that you just show love to everybody, and it doesn't matter what the expectations are, or what happens? It's because you love what you're doing. You love the people. Imagine if the older brother was the first one to meet his brother as he came to the thing and said, Dad, look who came home. Imagine that. Imagine what would happen if that would have happened. Imagine the transformation that would have happened in that older brother, that younger brother, and even the father. The father would have been like, wow, my oldest son gets it. But most of the time we don't. We're quick to tear down. We're quick to say, nah. Let me ask you this, becoming the father, that's the hard part. Nouwen in his book, he says the ultimate insight is true maturity is becoming like the Father, compassionate, open-armed, grace-filled. Man, what the older son was like that? What if he had compassion? What if he was open-armed? What if he was grace-filled? How many of us leaders are like that? The goal isn't just to come home or even to serve in the house. It is to become a safe place for others to come home. It's a place that others people can come to. Imagine that younger brother. He's probably scared to death to come home because of what everybody thinks and what everybody's done. It's so awesome in my house. When my middle son came home from being homeless, we welcomed him with open arms, and we embraced him, and we had compassion, and we had love for him. We didn't ostracize him. We didn't say, no, you can't come and do that. No, we did what the Father did. We embraced him. And he's growing from that. In the 7 months that he's been home, it's been awesome. He's grown in love. He's grown in compassion. He's got a job. He's paying off his fines from probation. He's doing all these steps and doing all these things. But what would have happened if I would have just cast shame on him? If I'd have just cast shame upon him? And this is like what the prodigal son father did. He didn't. He was compassionate. He was open armed. He was grace filled. You see, the father didn't ask for an apology before running. He ran because he recognized his son, not his failure. So many times I've told my kids, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. Even though you fail, I'm still proud of you. I picked up my middle son from his job the other day, and as soon as he got in the car, I was like, son, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of who you're becoming. So let me ask you this. Can we be that kind of leader? Can you be a wounded healer, a home for the broken, a father in a world full of orphans? And that's what God wants us to do. You take care of the widows. I talked about that in one of my tailgates, taking care of the widows, taking care of the orphans. All my kids are adopted, all 5 of them. Dude, if I didn't have compassion, I wouldn't have any kids. See, he ran because he recognized his son, not his failure. Leave it in the comments, man. Can we be that kind of leader? A wounded leader, a home for the broken, a father in a world of orphans, a father and people and guys and ministers and leaders that are limping along. As I close this down and close this up, it's really on my heart to be able to do that. I mean, that is the Acts 2 church. That is who we are. That's what I love about Hope Beyond Borders, and that organization and Winston Bowie and what they're trying to do. They're trying to change the paradigm of helping and helping those that are underdeserved, underprivileged, those that the orphans, the people that really need something from God. So wherever you are in the story, whether you're the prodigal, whether you're the older brother, or somewhere in between, God's not done with you. In fact, He may be preparing to use your wound as a key to someone else's healing. That's why I'm doing this podcast. That's why I do what I do. That's why I talk into a mic. That's why I do the tailgates, so that I can speak to somebody who has been where I've been. And where I've been is where you've been, and vice versa, so that I can speak to that, so I can help lead you out of that desert. You know, you're not too far gone, and you're not too broken to lead. You might just be exactly the kind of leader that this generation needs. This generation needs leaders who are ready to embrace, ready to be passionate, ready to love, ready to do what they have to do. And that's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you that God wants to use you even if you're limping. If you're a leader, if you're a pastor or whatever, you know, let me know. Let me know in the comments. If you're struggling, let me know. I'd love to pray with you. I'd love to talk to you. I'd love to just whatever I can do, you know. And I ask you right now, if this episode really speaks to you, I want you to share it with someone who's been wondering or who's been wounded. I want you to take time this week to sit with Luke 15 and Henri Nouwen's Wounded Leader. It's on Amazon. You can check it out and look at it. But I want you to let God speak through your pain. Let God speak to your pain. And I will talk to you guys next week.